Welcome back, everybody. So today in lesson 5.2, we're going to learn about Java for loops. Now the chapter we're on, chapter 5, is about loops in general, or iteration would be the fancy technical term we'd use for it. And what a for loop is a kind of variation of the while loop that we can use to make life easier in certain situations. So let's check that out. So first thing I want to do today is look at a common while loop pattern that the for loop will basically make easier for us. So common looping pattern here, where I have a counter variable with a starting value. I have my looping condition that tells me kind of where this loop's going to stop at. Okay, it's going to stop when I gets above 5. And then within the loop, we're simply just going to print off the I, our counter, and count up by 1. Okay, so running this code here, going into the loop, I starting at 1 is less than 5, so the loop will run. We'll print the I. We'll count up by 1 for the I then, and print the 2, print the 3, print the 4. Okay, we'll print the 5 then, and on that last iteration, after I print 5, I will go up by 1 to 6. Okay, 6 is not less than or equal to 5. Okay, therefore the loop will terminate, and we'll move on with the rest of our code. Okay, so again, common looping pattern where the different parts we have are basically our counter variable has a beginning position or a starting position at 1. Okay, we have a stopping position where we're going to run up until 5. And then we have a specific amount we want to increment or decrement by each time through that loop. Okay, while loops are great in general. But anytime you have a loop with a specific purpose where we want to start looping somewhere, stop looping somewhere, and count up by a specific amount every time, we're actually better off using a for loop, and the for loop's going to have these exact same parts. All right, so here's our exact same program written as a for loop. And the way the for loop makes life easier is it combines the start condition, stop condition, and the increment, decrement all within the loop header here, which cleans up the code within my loop, and then also helps me avoid having extra variables defined going into the loop as well. Okay, so what's going to happen with this for loop is we're going to start at I equals 1, just like we did with the while loop. We're going to loop while I is less than or equal to 5. So again, 5 kind of becomes our stopping condition once again. And then the incrementing, the adding 1 every time happens within the header here as well. And if I run this, I'm going to get the exact same things we had before. First time through the loop, we'll print a 1, then a 2, then a 3, then a 4, then a 5. And as I increment that last time through, all right, my stopping condition will be false. Okay, so we'd move on to the next part of our code. So as far as a definition goes, we'll say a for loop is a block of code associated with a condition, and the block of code will run a set number of times depending on the loop condition and the increment, decrement value. Okay, so again, it's a block of code with an initial value, a Boolean condition that determines whether the loop runs or not, and it increments and decrements, okay, kind of within that same block of code. And then here's where the code will go every time the loop runs. All right, so let's take a few minutes to talk about each of those pieces in that loop header. We'll start off with the start. So again, the nice thing about this is I don't need to worry about initializing variables before my loop. I can initialize them right within that loop header here. And it's basically the same type of code I'd use to initialize a int variable anywhere else in the program. I need to tell Java what type of variable I have, and for our purposes, we'll just say int. I need to give it a name. Now typically we'll say I and J, some simple letters like that, usually I for index. Okay, but we can really name that anything we want. And then we'll give it a start value here of a 1. Okay, so in other words, my loop's going to start with that counter variable at 1. Okay, so again, the start value tells the loop where to start. And then one of the tricks here is that the start section only happens once. Okay, so once we initialize run to 1 and start counting up, this line of code's not going to get run again. We're never going to go back to the 1 there. It only happens once. Okay, the next part of our for loop is the looping condition, and you can think about that as telling the loop where to stop. Okay, each time through the loop, the condition is evaluated. This condition must be true in order for the loop to execute. Okay, we could say that the loop runs while the condition is true. Okay, so this is technically doing the same thing as a while loop, but a lot of times we think about this as this is the number where I want to start, this is where I want to stop. Okay, I want to stop once that condition is false. And then the last piece is where we tell the loop how much to increment or decrement by each time through our loop. Now, in most cases, what we'll do is we'll just say counter variable plus plus, because we want to count up by 1 every time, or we could say minus minus because we want to go down by 1 every time. But really, we could count up or down by any amount we want. In this case here, we're counting up by 3s every time, and we can do that to kind of make our loops fit any type of specific purpose we're looking for. Okay, so again, it tells the loop how much to change the counter variable by after each time through the loop. All right, so now let's just run through this code to make sure we understand how it's working. We've got our start condition, so run is going to start at 1. It's going to run as long as run is less than or equal to 10. And I suppose technically you could make that condition where the loop doesn't actually run, but that would be a mistake. There'd be no point in writing the loop then. And it looks like the run plus equals 3 means we're going to go up by 3 every time this loop runs. Okay, so first time through we're starting run at 1. It will print the value of run, which is 1. It's then going to increment, so run is now a 4. 1 plus 3 is 4. That is still less than 10, so the loop will run. It'll print the run, increase the value by 3, which would be a 7. It'll print that. Increase the value by 3 again, which would be a 10. It will print that because we do have the or equal to here. Now, as far as the loop header goes, maybe you have the or equal to, maybe you don't. Depends on the situation. And then once this last run is print here, once we print the 10, run increments goes up by 3 again, so now it's 13. That does not satisfy my loop condition anymore. Therefore, the loop is done. Okay, we'll move on to the rest of the code and print done in this situation here. All right, so like we said, a for loop is just a more compact or fancier version of a while loop. And there'll be certain situations where you want to use a while loop or you have to use a while loop. But there's other situations where the for loop's going to make life easier, and we're going to go through a few of these right now. Okay, now one of them is going to be when we're summing a total. Basically, anytime we want to add something up from a specific starting position to a specific ending position, okay, the for loop's going to make life easier for us. Okay, so let's look at that summing pattern here. Let's read through this code and figure out what it does. Okay, now first thing, kind of like we've already seen with a while loop, we're going to want a variable before the loop to keep track of what we're totaling. So we've got total get 0. And then for this for loop, we're running from I equals 1 while I is less than or equal to 10. So in other words, this loop's going to run from 1 to 10, counting up by 1 every time. And then what is it doing? Well, if I mod 2 equals 0, so in other words, if I is divisible by 2, we're going to add that I to the total. And then it looks like we'll print the total out at the end. Okay, so in other words, what this loop's doing is adding up all the even numbers from 1 to 10. So as in 2 plus 4 plus 6 plus 8 plus 10, which I believe will give us a 30 once that's all summed up. Now another common use for loops is to loop over a string, or in other words, process a string. So let's take a look at an example there. Let's say I have the string s gets computer, and I want to loop through every letter of that string and do something with it. Okay, now it could be counting letters, it could be searching for a letter, it could be changing letters around. We want to loop over that string. Okay, the typical pattern for that is going to be starting our counter variable at 0. Okay, reason for that, remember the index of the first character of a string is always at index 0. And that's usually why we'll use I for a for loop, is we're talking indexes. And I'm going to run while I is less than the string.length. Now, even though the length of the string is 1 more than the final index, since I don't have the or equal to here, we're not going to go beyond that string. We're not going to end up out of bounds. Okay, we'll be okay, and we'll only go through the last letter. Okay, and then I want to count up by 1. I want to go through every letter, so I need to do every single one. And then reminder, the way we can access an individual letter is with the substring method. So I'm going to say string L, as in letter, is equal to s, our string, dot substring, I, comma, I plus 1. So what our loop's going to do here is when I starts at 0, it's going to look at just the first letter. And then when I is 1, it's looking at just the second letter. When I is 2, it's looking at just the third letter. And it looks like all this loop's doing is it's printing out the L, that letter we're creating every time. So if I ran this code, I'd get all on separate lines, okay, the letters of computer. Okay, not really much happening there, but again, we could be searching for a letter, we could be swapping out letters, we could be counting letters, a lot of different stuff we could do looping through that string. All right, then the last thing I want to do before we write some example code is kind of give you an example of what not to do. Okay, we could make a for while loop, which wouldn't be a good idea. You'd be better off just making a while loop in this case. But let me show you how we can kind of force a for loop to work more like a while loop. Now I've got my for loop header here, and notice I've got nothing in the initial condition. Okay, I can actually technically declare that counter variable outside of my loop. And that's something that you typically won't do, but rather than saying int and declaring something here, you could actually use a variable from somewhere else in the program. Now, issue with that is your loop, as it increments, is going to change that variable, so you'd have to take that into account with the rest of your program. Okay, probably not a good idea, but technically you could do it. Notice the other thing I'm missing here is my increment-decrement section. If I left that blank, what I'd have to do is just make sure that I update it within the loop body, actually. Okay, we will see some examples next semester where we will change that counter variable within the loop body under certain conditions, but typically you don't want to do this. If you're ending up with something like this, you're probably better off making a while loop anyways. Okay, so I guess again an example of what not to do here. Okay, if I run this code, what's happening? Looks like it's just totaling numbers from 1 to 5, which would give us a 15. Okay, so again, for loops are fancy while loops, and we can kind of make them work a lot like each other if we mess with this for loop and write it in an unconventional way. All right, so let's jump over to CodeBoard and put one of these for loops together. Right now I'm in 5.2 coding demonstration. You can find that on Moodle. And what am I looking at doing here? I want to write the substring count method that counts the occurrences of word in sentence. Okay, where sentence is one of my parameters, word is the other. So for example, if I run this on that, like, is, like, so, like, funny, and like, what I want to do is I want to count how many times like showed up in that sentence string. Okay, we've done some processing of strings with while loops before. Now, while loops are great anytime we're going through and we want to actually change something or remove something from the string. But the problem with a while loop is if I want to do something like counting, I'm going to have to keep track of what my last index was so that I don't keep repeatedly counting the same occurrence of, in this case, the word like. Okay, the for loop's going to be a lot easier to go through each letter individually and count things up. Okay, so let's start doing that. Now we're making a count here. We want to return an int, so I'm just going to start off with int count, get 0, before I get into my loop. And then I want to loop through this sentence string. So the pattern for that is we'll say for, I'll say int I get 0. Okay, and remember, anytime you want to loop through a whole string, you want to start at index 0. Okay, for the stopping condition, we'll say, well, I is less than sentence dot length. So I want to loop from the beginning of the string to the end of the string. Now, Here's the trick with this one. I actually have to add something extra to my stop condition. Because, for example, if I look at the case of the word like, I can't loop through my entire string. Because when I get to, let's say, the second to the last character, if I want to see like is contained here, I'm going to be searching this sentence string beyond the end of it. I'm going to be going out of bounds, in other words. So I do need to make an adjustment to my stopping condition to make sure that I never check anything past the end of the sentence. The trick for that is I'm going to have I go to sentence.length minus word.length. Okay, and I might need to add an extra -1 to that. I'm not 100% sure. I suppose if this was a AP test, I'd take out some paper and count things out. But I'm going to kind of guess and check it here. I think we're good, but I'm not 100% positive. That's okay, though. We can run it and see. Okay, and we want to go through every letter, so we'll say I plus plus, counting up by 1 every time here. Okay, well, what do we want to do as we loop here then? At each letter, what I want to do is I want to check and see if the substring of my sentence is equal to that word. So I'll say if sentence put an N in the wrong spot. There we go. All right, sentence dot substring starting at I, okay, our looping variable, and going through I plus the length of the word we're looking for. Okay, so we want to examine the portion of that sentence from the index we're looking at to however many letters that word's going to be. Okay, so instead of taking a single letter here, we're taking a chunk of letters. And I want to see if that's equal to the word we're searching for. So we'll say dot equals word. All right, so if the substring of sentence from the current index we're looking at through the length of the end of the word of that sentence is equal to word, then what we'll do is we'll just say count plus plus. Okay, so we'll count up by 1. We have found our substring, so we're good to count up. All right, that's it for my loop. I don't need an extra else, okay, to count things up. Okay, the loop automatically counts through each time through. I do want to make sure that I return my count. And let's cross our fingers, compile. What do we got here? Spelled sentence wrong on line 17. Got that N in the wrong spot. Compile. Okay, compiled successfully. Now, like I said, I'm not 100% sure if I need to add something else to this. Now, if I did, that wouldn't be a compile time error. It wouldn't catch it now. It would catch it when it runs. Let's cross our fingers. So hopefully we got it right. Run. Hey, it looks good. We got the 3. It didn't go out of bounds. Yep, it counted the 3 occurrences of like 1, 2, 3 in that string. Okay, so we know we did things correctly there. All right, so that's it for our for loop section. So at this point, you can start working on some programs, cranking out some code. Let us know if you need help, and we'll see you folks next time.